All right, today's class is all about getting our black vector shapes as clean as we can and really being able to control them within Adobe Illustrator. So once you know what to use and how to control them, it can actually go pretty fast. So that's why I'm actually demoing on Remus's logo here, because the star shapes are so mechanical and clean, it made sense to use the shape tool. But this horse shape is much more organic and varied. So what tools can you use to make that vector shape? And the typical one is the pen tool, right? Like I showed last class. And if I use the pen tool to draw it, and I just click and drag with the pen tool, then we get something like this, right? Like if I was going to do a star this way, just click and drag, or not click and drag, just click and move, 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 click and move. It will always give us straights. This is what's called polygonal design, because we're making polygons, straight edge shapes. Remember, we got to close them. And then if we want to play with curves after the fact, we have to change to the small selection tool. And then we can actually play with all of the curves or just individual anchors and curves. So how could we play with all of the curves? We'll click in the middle and then just round out with the rounding tool, and we can soften them. Or if we want to do them individually, we click out and then we click on these individual anchor points and we can just round those. And we can use this tool to move those individual anchor points and change them. And if we use the anchor point tool, which is you can get to with Shift C, we can actually convert straights into curves, but it'll be on both sides. Right? Oh, there we go. But then you can click on just the handle and play with them individually. You can even turn them back into straights. So there's lots of ways you can do it. So what I want to show you now is that, yes, you can use the pen tool, and you can do it all with straights like this. So I've traced the horse all with straights. Wow. But then when you want to turn it into curves, right, you can use the small selection tool, which you can get to with Command if you've ever used it. And then I can use this Convert Anchor Point tool to turn them into curves. And then with that same tool, I can grab an individual handle and change the curve on both sides. Right? So it's a really powerful tool, this Convert Anchor Point tool, which you'll find underneath the pen tool. For a clean design, you want to limit the number of anchor points you have. So you don't want to have just hundreds of anchor points when 20 or so would do the job for you. And why I like learning with polygonal design is you realize a lot of the time straights are doing the job you want a little bit cleaner. And then you have to be a lot more mindful about where you actually add curves. But it's all a matter of personal taste. So just kind of this subtle use of curves. And now I'm feeling like I should apply some of this knowledge to my own logo. But there you go. And then we turn it into a solid shape. But we have to select it first, which we can do here or we can do by clicking on it. So you can see a mix of curves and straights. But for those of you who just really have trouble with the pen tool, though you do need to learn it to have any competency with vector design, there is another tool that was added by Illustrator, and that's called the pencil tool. And it's my favorite tool in Illustrator. You will find it underneath the brush. So it's called the pencil tool. And if you double click on it, which I recommend, I would say for this kind of symbolic graphic, you want to set your smooth You want to set it to be just slightly more smooth than it is accurate, because this will smooth out your path. And this is made to be used with a tablet, so I'm using my tablet right now. And all you do with the pencil tool is you just draw like you would something in Photoshop. So I am just freehand drawing this horse, and I might wobble a little bit, especially as I go with different angles. But what's nice is it's going to smooth it out for me by the end. But remember, I want to close the path. The biggest mistake students make with a pencil tool is they don't close the path, so they end up with a lot of individual strokes as though it were a pixel program, and it's not. So I got to get back to the beginning and then close the path. And then you can see how much it smoothed it out for me. It actually maybe smoothed it out too much for this kind of design. But this is why I love the pencil tool. I'm going to go ahead and fill it with black, right? Or maybe I'll swap it so I can see my outline. But I can now set the pencil tool to be more accurate, and I can redraw it. So the pencil tool is like magic scissors. And as long as I start on the path and end on the path, I can redraw it. Now, what is the pencil tool not great at? It's not great at sharp, clean edges. You can get them, but you can see how they can be a bit of a difficulty. But it allows you to keep editing and fixing it. It doesn't give you the tight control that the pen tool gives you, but it allows you to make these vectors freehand and then to edit them. And of course, you could always try it first with the pen tool and then fix it with the pencil tool. Because these aren't pixels that we're affecting with different tools. All we're ever doing is manipulating the anchor points and the vectors between them. But what the pencil tool will do is actually plot new anchor points for us as we need them. So, all different ways to get complex shapes within Illustrator. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open up my project, which I saved as an AI file. So when you save these, you save them as Adobe Illustrator files. And I can see what have I built so far. I've built the eyes of the snake, I've built the wing, and I've built the head here. How can I build this really in a controlled way? I can use the pen tool, start at a point. We'll start right here. Click to where I want my curve to end, and then click and drag out my curve. Then click back onto the anchor point to get to a straight, which is what I want. And then another straight. And then another straight. Or maybe actually I want to thicken it a little bit. There we go. Another straight. Another straight. Another straight. And then I want to round it out by closing it out at the end. Okay, now this is an interesting example because this is symmetrical design, right? I want this to be perfectly symmetrical, but what I drew is not absolutely symmetrical. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to convert it into a fill with no stroke, and then I'm going to turn on my guides and my rulers within Illustrator. And to do that, I hit Command R, just like in Photoshop, and then I can drag a guide to show me the center point of this shape. All right? And I can move that guide. But what's interesting in Illustrator is that the guide is linked to your layer group. So you can see that guide is actually one of those features, because guides come in very handy in Illustrator. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to duplicate this shape. So I select it so I can see the anchor points, and then I'm going to hit Command C, or I can say Edit Copy. And then I'm going to see Edit Paste in Place, which is different than Command V. It's actually Shift Command V. But I'm going to say Paste in Place. That gives me a duplicate of it. Do not hit Command J in Illustrator, or you'll go into a different viewing mode, which you have to get out of. So Command J only works in Photoshop. So Command C and then Edit Paste in Place to get something in the exact right place. Why am I doing this? Because with this duplicate, I'm actually going to delete one half of this. How do I delete anchor points? I use the pen tool and I hover and click right on the anchor points. And what does that do? That deletes them. When I select it again, how can I change this curve? I have to click on the pen tool, find the anchor point tool, and then I can move this and turn that to a straight. So what I did is I made a duplicate of what I drew. What I drew was this with the pen tool, but I want to make it perfectly symmetrical, so I moved a guide in to find that center line. And then I made a duplicate, and then I removed all the anchor points on the other side. Now I'm going to duplicate this. So Command C or Edit Copy, and then Edit Paste in Place. Now there's another one right there. It's already selected. And then I'm going to right click on it and say Transform, Reflect. And I'm going to reflect it vertically at 90 degrees like a mirror. And then I'm going to use the Move tool or the Large Selection tool and move it over. And then I can turn off my guide. So now I have that shape perfectly symmetrical. So whenever you want to make perfect symmetry, which is called bilateral symmetry, you can always just cut it in the middle and then duplicate it and flip it. Okay, I have these shapes. How can I refine them, modify them, make them better? Interesting. Okay, so once I can see my anchor points, I can modify. So I have to use a small selection tool. So what do I want to modify? Well, I want to round it at the bottom here. So how can I do that? Well, I can actually use the rounding tools if they allow me to, but they're already split a little bit. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I am simply going to use my pencil tool and I'm going to redraw and kind of round it out at the bottom here and then come back up. And what my problem was, I didn't end right on the path, and so it created a new path for me instead. So remember, when you use the pencil tool, you have to start on the path, go through at least one anchor point, then you have to end on the path, go through at least one anchor point. This is being difficult for me. There we go. But what's hard with the pencil tool is getting it to be really simplified, right, and clean. And because I have so many anchor points, sometimes the best thing to do is to just start it over. Now, instead of deleting it, I can just turn it off and make a new path. So that's what I'm going to do. And to really clean it up, now that I've shown you all those different ways, I'm going to do it with the pen tool. Start it here, click for a straight, and then go for a curve, click and